The morning sun cast a golden glow over Maplewood Lane, a quiet suburban street where every house looked the same, except for one. At the corner stood Mrs. Eleanor Hayes' home, a cozy little cottage with peeling white paint and a crooked mailbox. Eleanor, known to her neighbors simply as Grandma Ellie, was 74 years old, with silver hair always tied back in a bun and kind blue eyes that carried both warmth and wisdom. She had lived in the house for nearly 40 years, raising her children there, and now she filled her days with knitting, baking pies for the neighbors, and tending to her beloved roses. Those roses weren't ordinary flowers. To Eleanor, they were living memories. Each bush told a story. The crimson roses planted on her 40th wedding anniversary, the white ones for her late husband's birthday, the yellow ones when her first grandchild was born. Her front yard had transformed into a sea of colors, bursting with life and fragrance that could brighten even the gloomiest morning. Neighbors often slowed their cars just to admire the sight, sometimes rolling down their windows to say, "Ellie, your roses make this whole street beautiful." But not everyone agreed. The Homeowners Association, the HOA, saw the roses differently. To them, Ellie's garden was a violation, an unapproved modification to the front yard that didn't match the neighborhood's uniform, cookie-cutter look. Where the board saw defiance, Ellie only saw beauty. It began with a letter slipped into her mailbox. Notice of violation, unauthorized landscaping. The paper was cold, clinical, demanding she remove the rose bushes within 14 days or face a fine of $200 per day. Eleanor had laughed when she first read it. Surely this had to be a mistake. Who would fine an old woman for planting flowers? But the next day, another letter arrived. Then another. Soon, the letters turned into fines, and the fines turned into threats of legal action. Eleanor's laughter faded into worry. Her small pension couldn't possibly cover hundreds of dollars in penalties. One morning, as she knelt to water her roses, a black SUV pulled up. Out stepped 3 HOA board members, dressed in sharp suits as if they were attending a courtroom trial. The leader, a tall man with slicked back hair and dark sunglasses, strode up the walkway with a clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Hayes," he said coolly, "you've ignored multiple violation notices. These roses must be removed immediately. Rules are rules." Eleanor stood slowly, her knees aching but her voice steady. "These roses aren't just plants. They're my life, my memories. You can't just take them away." The man smirked. "Sentiment doesn't override bylaws. You have until Friday. After that, we'll escalate this matter." Neighbors peeked from behind curtains, whispering. Children watched wide-eyed from across the street. A storm was brewing, and it wasn't just about flowers. It was about power, respect, and the fight of one elderly woman against a faceless board determined to break her spirit. Eleanor tightened her grip on the watering can, staring down the HOA officials. Something inside her, something stronger than fear, ignited that morning. They thought she was just an old woman with no fight left. They were wrong. This was the beginning of a battle that would shake the entire neighborhood. A battle no one on Maplewood Lane would ever forget. By the end of the week, word had spread across Maplewood Lane. The HOA was going after Grandma Ellie's roses. Some neighbors shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered that the board was only picking on her because she was old and lived alone. Still, most stayed silent, too afraid of becoming the next target. Friday morning came, and with it came the storm. Eleanor was sitting at her kitchen table, sipping tea, when she heard the rumble of an engine outside. She peered through her lace curtains and saw a flatbed truck parked at the curb. On it were shovels, hedge trimmers, and trash bins. The HOA had sent a crew. They were here to rip out her roses. Her heart pounded. She clutched the silver locket around her neck, the one her late husband had given her, and whispered, "Not today." With surprising speed, she rushed to the yard, blocking the workers' path with her frail but determined frame. "You're not touching a single petal," she said firmly. The workers hesitated, unsure whether to confront a 74-year-old woman. But then the board president stepped out of the SUV again, his sunglasses glinting in the sun. He raised his voice so the whole street could hear. "Mrs. Hayes, you are in direct violation of community standards. If you interfere with our contractors, you'll face legal consequences." Do you understand? The neighbors gathered in small clusters now, phones in hand, recording every second. Some looked horrified, others curious, but none stepped forward to help. Eleanor's voice quivered, but she refused to move. You call these violations? These are roses. Roses my husband planted before he passed. Roses I've tended for decades. If you want them gone, you'll have to take me with them. The crowd gasped. For a moment, even the workers froze. The HOA president clenched his jaw. Enough of this drama. Get her out of the way. That was when a voice shouted from the crowd. Leave her alone. It was a young man named Ethan from 2 houses down. He stepped forward, his fists clenched. She's lived here longer than any of you have been on this board. You're really going to bully a grandma over flowers? The tension thickened. More neighbors pulled out their phones, recording. Some whispered that the video would go viral. And this is exactly where you, watching the story, can make a difference. If you believe Grandma Ellie deserves to stand her ground against the HOA, hit that subscribe button, tap like, and share this video so more people hear her story. Your support gives power to people like Ellie, who refuse to be silenced. Back in the yard, Eleanor felt her knees wobble but her spirit blaze brighter. She looked at Ethan, then at the growing crowd of witnesses. For the first time, she didn't feel alone. The HOA president noticed too. His confident smirk faltered as he realized this wasn't going to be as simple as he thought. The neighborhood was watching. The world might soon be watching too. But he wasn't about to back down. Fine, he said, pulling out a thick envelope from his briefcase. If you won't comply, Mrs. Hayes, we'll take this to court. By the time we're done, those roses will be gone, and you might not even have a house to live in. The neighbors gasped again. Eleanor's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Inside were legal documents threatening foreclosure if the fines weren't paid. Her roses weren't just in danger. Her home was. And yet, as the HOA president turned back to his SUV, Eleanor whispered to herself, "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life." Because this fight had only just begun. That night, Eleanor barely slept. The envelope from the HOA sat on her kitchen table, its contents heavy enough to crush her spirit if she let them. She brewed cup after cup of chamomile tea, staring at the bold letters. Notice of escalation. Failure to comply will result in legal proceedings, foreclosure, and recovery of costs. Her house, the place where she had raised her children, celebrated birthdays, mourned her husband, it was all on the line. Not just her roses, but her very existence in the neighborhood she had called home for 40 years. In the morning, she walked outside to check on her roses, hoping the sunlight would bring her peace. But the sight of her neighbors whispering across the street made her stomach twist. Some looked sympathetic. Others just curious, like they were watching a drama unfold instead of a woman's life unravel. Then Ethan showed up. He knocked on her door, his face flushed with anger. "Mrs. Hayes, I saw those papers. They can't just take your house. This is wrong." Eleanor sighed. "They've got lawyers, Ethan. All I have are roses." "Then let me help," he said. "I've got friends who know a thing or two about standing up to HOAs. You don't have to fight this alone." For the first time in days, a flicker of hope sparked inside her. But it was fragile. Later that afternoon, Eleanor decided to attend the HOA's monthly meeting at the community center. Normally, only a handful of people showed up. But tonight, the parking lot was full. Word of the rose battle had spread far and wide, and neighbors wanted to see what would happen. Inside, the board members sat at a long table, papers neatly stacked, voices sharp and rehearsed. At the center was the president, his sunglasses now swapped for reading glasses, but his smirk was the same. "Mrs. Hayes," he began when it was her turn to speak, "you violated Article 14, Section C, regarding uniform landscaping. This matter is closed. Remove the roses or face foreclosure." Eleanor's hands trembled as she stood before the microphone. Her voice cracked, but it carried across the silent room. "You call this uniform landscaping? My roses bring beauty, comfort, and joy to this community. You call it a violation. I call it home." The crowd murmured. A few clapped softly. The president banged his gavel. "Order," he barked. But then Ethan rose from his chair in the back. She's not breaking the community. She's making it better. These rules weren't written to punish grandmothers. They were written to bully people into obedience. The room erupted. Some cheered, others shouted, the board members scowled. The president slammed the gavel again. Enough. Mrs. Hayes has until Monday. After that, the legal process begins. Meeting adjourned. Security guards escorted Eleanor out as if she were a criminal. Outside, the night air felt heavy. Neighbors gathered around her, some offering quiet words of encouragement, others too scared to take sides. As she walked home under the dim glow of streetlights, Eleanor thought about what the president had said. Monday. That gave her 3 days. 3 days to save her roses. 3 days to save her home. She whispered to herself, if they think I'm giving up, they don't know me at all. But what Eleanor didn't know was that the HOA was already planning their next move, one that would push her to the breaking point and force the entire neighborhood to take a stand. The weekend stretched before Eleanor like a ticking clock. Every hour felt borrowed, every moment with her roses more precious than the last. She spent Saturday morning tending to them, whispering to each bloom as though they were old friends. Neighbors passed by, offering sympathetic nods, but few dared to stop. By evening, Ethan dropped by with a stack of papers. I've been researching, he said. There are cases where HOAs lost in court. If we can prove they're overreaching, you might stand a chance. Eleanor smiled faintly. Thank you, Ethan. But lawyers cost money. More than I have. Then we'll find another way, he insisted. You're not alone. That night, the sky turned a deep velvet, stars blinking down like watchful eyes. Eleanor fell asleep in her armchair, the soft hum of the television lulling her. But around midnight, a sound jolted her awake, metal scraping, footsteps crunching on gravel. Her heart raced. She peeked out the window. What she saw made her blood run cold. 3 men in dark uniforms were in her yard, their flashlights sweeping across the roses. One held hedge clippers, another carried a shovel, and the third was on his phone, whispering instructions. They weren't ordinary workers. They were hired by the HOA to do what she had refused to allow. Eleanor threw open her door. Stop. Get away from my garden. The men froze, caught in the act. But instead of retreating, the one with the clippers stepped forward. Orders from the board, ma'am. These flowers are coming out tonight. Neighbors' lights flickered on as curtains shifted. People were watching again, but no one moved to help. Eleanor's hands shook, but her voice thundered with defiance. You'll have to cut me down before you touch them. The men exchanged uneasy glances. Just then Ethan came running from down the street, barefoot, his phone recording. I've got it all on camera, he shouted. Touch one rose, and the whole world will see what you're doing. The men hesitated. The one on the phone muttered something, then they backed off, retreating to their truck. Tires screeched as they sped away into the night. Eleanor collapsed onto the porch, tears streaming down her face. Ethan helped her up gently. They won't stop, she whispered. They'll just come back stronger. And so will we, Ethan promised. The next morning, videos of the midnight attack flooded social media. Ethan's recording had spread like wildfire, shared by angry neighbors, outraged strangers, and even local news outlets. Comments poured in, how can they bully an old woman like this? Those roses are beautiful, leave her alone. The HOA board woke up to a storm they hadn't expected. Their emails were flooded, their phone lines jammed, reporters camped outside the president's house. But instead of backing down, the president doubled his resolve. At an emergency meeting, he declared, we're being attacked by outsiders who don't understand our community. If Mrs. Hayes wants a fight, then a fight she'll get. We'll crush her in court. Eleanor heard his words replayed on the news that night. She sat quietly on her porch, looking at her roses glowing under the moonlight. She was terrified, yes, but she was no longer alone. The neighborhood was stirring. Strangers were rallying. And deep down, Eleanor realized something had changed. This wasn't just about her roses anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been silenced, bullied, or pushed aside by people in power. The battle lines had been drawn. And the real war was about to begin. By Monday morning, Maplewood Lane no longer felt like the quiet street it once was. News vans lined the curbs, reporters clustered with microphones, and neighbors lingered in groups, whispering as cameras rolled. Grandma Ellie's roses had become the center of a storm no one could have imagined. Eleanor sat on her porch, wearing her faded blue cardigan, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked calm, but inside, her heart rattled like a drum. The papers had said Monday was the deadline. Today, the HOA would make their move. Sure enough, just after 9, the black SUV pulled up again. The HOA president stepped out, his polished shoes clicking on the pavement, followed by a team of suited board members and uniformed contractors. He looked around at the cameras with disdain, then fixed his gaze on Eleanor. "Mrs. Hayes," he said coldly, "this circus ends today. Either you remove the roses voluntarily, or we proceed with foreclosure proceedings. You've embarrassed this community long enough." Eleanor rose slowly, gripping the porch railing for support. Her voice, though shaky, carried across the yard. "You call this embarrassment? These roses are the only bit of beauty left in a street of gray boxes. They're memories of my husband, my children, my life. And you want to destroy them because they don't match your rules." The crowd murmured. Reporters jotted notes, cameras zoomed in. Ethan stepped forward, placing himself beside Eleanor. "You can't bulldoze a woman's life just because her flowers don't fit your vision. The world is watching you." The president's jaw tightened. He signaled to the contractors. "Do it." The workers hesitated, eyes flicking nervously to the crowd. Dozens of neighbors had their phones raised, recording every second. But under the president's glare, 2 men stepped toward the garden. That's when something unexpected happened. A voice rang out from the crowd. "Not today." It was Mrs. Alvarez, a quiet neighbor who had always kept to herself. She marched across the lawn and stood beside Eleanor. Then another neighbor joined. And another. Within seconds, a wall of residents formed around the roses, shoulder to shoulder, defiant. The HOA president's face turned red. "This is trespassing. You're all violating HOA rules." But the crowd only grew louder. "Leave her roses. Stop the bullying. We stand with Ellie." The contractors froze, unwilling to cross the human barrier. The president barked orders, but his authority crumbled under the weight of cameras and chants. Then, in a desperate move, he grabbed the hedge clippers himself. "Fine. I'll do it." He stormed toward the roses, his arm raised. And Eleanor stepped forward, blocking him. Her frail frame stood inches from his towering figure, but her eyes blazed with unshakable resolve. "Touch these roses, and you'll have to push me down in front of everyone here." The street fell silent. The cameras zoomed in. The president's hand shook as he realized what he'd done. He wasn't just fighting an old woman anymore. He was fighting an entire neighborhood, an audience of millions, and the weight of his own cruelty. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. The standoff stretched in the heavy silence. And then, sirens wailed in the distance. Police cruisers turned onto Maplewood Lane, their lights flashing. The showdown had reached its breaking point. The flashing red and blue lights cut through the tension like a knife. Police cruisers screeched to a halt, and officers stepped out, hands resting on their belts as they surveyed the chaotic scene. A furious HOA president gripping hedge clippers, an elderly woman standing firm before her roses, and a neighborhood united in defiance. One officer, tall and calm, approached. "What's going on here?" The president puffed out his chest, pointing to Eleanor. "She's in violation of HOA regulations. These flowers are illegal. I'm enforcing community bylaws." The officer raised an eyebrow, his gaze sliding to Eleanor. Is this your property?" "Yes," Eleanor said, her voice steady. "And these roses belong here. They're part of my home." The officer turned back to the president. "Sir, unless you have a court order, you can't trespass or damage private property. HOA rules don't override state law." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The president's face turned crimson. "But we issued fines, notices." "Not the same as a court order," the officer interrupted firmly. "Put the clippers down." For a moment, the president looked like he might explode. But under the glare of the cameras, the chanting crowd, and the steady authority of the police, his bravado shattered. With a growl of frustration, he dropped the clippers to the ground. The crowd erupted in cheers. Neighbors hugged one another, children clapped, and some even cried. Eleanor's knees buckled, but Ethan caught her, steadying her as the weight of relief crashed over her. Reporters swarmed, shoving microphones forward. "Mrs. Hayes, how does it feel to win?" She wiped her tears, smiling through the exhaustion. "This isn't just about me. It's about anyone who's ever been bullied into silence. My roses aren't weeds. They're love. They're life. And no rulebook can take that away." The story went viral that very night. Headlines blared, "Grandma versus HOA, Roses defeat the rules. Neighborhood unites against HOA bullying. Elderly woman's roses spark national debate." Support poured in from across the country, letters, donations, and even offers from lawyers who wanted to defend her for free. A month later, Eleanor sat once again on her porch, her roses brighter than ever, as a summer breeze rustled their petals. The HOA president had resigned in disgrace, the board was being restructured, and new bylaws were being written, this time with input from the community. Ethan dropped by with a grin. "Your roses are famous now. They even made the local news segment called Good Things in Our Town." Eleanor chuckled softly. "I never wanted fame. I just wanted my roses." She reached down, plucking a crimson bloom and handing it to Ethan. "But maybe this fight wasn't just about me after all." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Eleanor whispered to her garden, as though her husband were listening, "We did it." The roses swayed gently in the breeze, as if nodding in agreement. And on Maplewood Lane, peace returned, not the silence of conformity, but the harmony of a community that had learned to stand together. Because sometimes, even the smallest flower can spark the biggest revolution.